All right. Good afternoon, everybody, again. And thank you so much for sticking it out to the end here. We've got some wrap-up that I would like to do just as this last session, discussing representing older youth. And again, I really appreciate how many of you have been sitting here, paying attention, and engaging this entire time. Thank you for that. As with the earlier session, please let's make this a conversation so that we can rely on our collective wisdom, not just me standing here showing you slides and then everybody going home. Please share your thoughts and questions. So when I started thinking about representing older youth, I wanted to take a look at the latest numbers about the older youth who are in care right now. And honestly, I was a little bit surprised even that the numbers were even this high. 2018, we were looking at 29% of West Virginia's foster care population being age 14 or older. That's a very high percentage of kids that are older. They're going to have some unique needs that you'll need to think about how to meet. 8% of our youth in foster care in 2018 aged out. Turned 18 while they were in foster care. And 33% of the youth in foster care in 2018 had 3 or more placements during their most recent set of placements or episode. Those numbers are pretty staggering. So when you are dealing with some of these kids, obviously you're not just going to have the unique challenges of older youth. Some of them have indeed been traumatized by the system. And they're going to have some unique challenges in their needs, in communication, and in trying to help them figure out how to move forward, as opposed to having some of the younger kids who are going to have, we hope, a more predictable, permanent placement, whether with their parents or with somebody else, for a longer period of time, to have stability before reaching adulthood. So we talked a little bit this morning about what is the guardian ad litem's role. And well, we know that there's a dual role. We've got the role as attorney for the child and to represent the best interests of the child. And that doesn't change with older youth in terms of what the role is. However, it does indeed change in how you implement that role. So when you look at that, the manner in which you're going to communicate with older youth is going to change. The manner in which you consider what's in the best interest of an older youth may change based upon the fact that they are approaching adulthood. So these are some things that you want to be thinking about when you are appointed to represent a child who is 13, 14, 15, and up. Now, obviously, you want to balance this against the maturity level of the kids. You know, I spoke with a 12-year-old earlier this week, one of the kids that I have who's in foster care, and she communicated with me at the level that I've seen some of my 16 and 17-year-olds communicate. She's very, very bright, very articulate. She knew precisely what she wanted. She asked questions that were far beyond her chronological age. On the other hand, I've had some kids who were 15, but for various reasons, they were functioning emotionally, intellectually, academically, at a much younger level, 2, 3, 4 years younger than what you would anticipate. So you need to take all of that into account as you're trying to figure out how to move forward with a client who is an older youth. Their wishes also take on a much more significant part of your analysis and the court's analysis in the entire range of recommendations that you're going to be making to the court. Because as they're getting older, as they're approaching adulthood, not only are we statutorily mandated to give them special consideration when you're looking at whether or not there's going to be a termination of parental rights, but the court is required to look at those wishes and weigh them more heavily if you have a child that's older. So you really need to be looking at that. So let's talk a little bit about how you're going to communicate with some of these kids. And does anybody ever actually talk in person anymore? I mean, I go to visit some of my kids, but maybe you can tell me if this is your experience. For every conversation that I have face-to-face with one of my older youth, I probably have 10 text conversations with them because they're texting. Anybody else have that experience? They all want to communicate by text or, I'm sorry?
Or email.
Or by email, right, right. And nobody wants to use the phone anymore, they find, unless they're using it to text or to email. And so this is a very different experience than I think most of us grew up with. You know, we talked face to face or we made a phone call. But we need to be able to move forward and communicate with them where they are, at their level emotionally. And I don't necessarily mean where they are physically, I mean where they are emotionally. So yes, face to face and in person, we need to do that so that we can establish a bond with them, so that we can establish trust with them. But we need to figure out where best physically to do that and realize that that's not the only place we're going to meet them emotionally. Emotionally, they may feel safer face-to-face at school or in their counselor's office or another place that's quiet and private and more neutral. So you're going to meet them face-to-face emotionally there. But you're also going to need to meet them emotionally by text. Sometimes they won't tell you something face-to-face, but then they'll text it to you an hour after you leave. And I guarantee when they text you and say, oh, I forgot to tell you, and it's some earth-shattering revelation or decision that they've made, it's not because they forgot to tell you. It's because it was uncomfortable or difficult for them to communicate that face-to-face or on the phone. So they're finding their emotional space where they can share that information, and you go to that emotional space. That's where you meet them. That's how you're going to communicate with them. And it may be email. With some, it may be on Skype or some other type of face-to-face, but not really face-to-face mechanism. Yes?
I found that a lot of my clients, I do a lot of substance abuse work in addition to my law practice. A lot of them like the texting. However, I've learned that if I find myself getting engaged in even more than one page, I tell them all, if you have something more than a one-page text, call me. Because there's so much miscommunication, even in the written word, the inflection, and you can't pick up on different kinds of intonations and things. And so there could be a huge communication gap. Even though you're communicating, you've got that issue. So I tell them all, listen, I'm happy if it's a short question, let's be clear on it, because if not, then you get, I'll just tell them to call me if it looks like it's complicated, because then you waste a whole lot of time and then there's a lot of miscommunication going on.
And I think that's a great point. For those who may have not been able to hear, what he was suggesting was that if it's going to be a long or complicated text, then he advises his youth client to call him, because there are so many things that can be miscommunicated or misconstrued or misunderstood over a long series of texts. And I would agree with that. I think it's always better in the hierarchy to have a face-to-face or to have a phone call, but for them to at least get out that they need to talk to you. That's a really good starting point, and then you can go from there to a phone call.
Okay. And that really only works if you have that initial rapport established with them. So then you can say, you know, my adult clients, they'll say, hey, no, go ahead, give me a call. So because they know, and then they'll call.
Right, and that's exactly right. So wherever they feel comfortable, that's where you're going to meet them emotionally, wherever they feel comfortable. Now, a quick note about social media. I have had a lot of teen clients who want to contact me on Messenger or what do you, no. I tell them, look, this is not secure. This is not confidential if you do this. And what you tell me is very important. And it's important that it be secure, that you have a safe place that you can talk to me. So if you feel that the only way you can reach me, and that should never be the only way they can reach you, but if they feel that's the only way they can reach you, then I advise my client to just send a simple, hey, please call me. Because that's not going to disclose anything. That's just a, hey, please call me. The flip side of that is this. I have had some teenagers that it's been tough to get a hold of because their phone's on, then it's off. And they're not as willing to talk to me if they're in the foster home or around other people. So sometimes it's me reaching out to them and saying, hey, please call me. And I get a better response from that with a couple of the older teens than I get from sending a text, than I get from trying to make a call when they may be wherever they are. They actually do call me when they're in a place where they feel safe to do so. So if you're going to allow any kind of social media use, just be very careful about that, because it's really not secure, and that's one way to let them feel safe without disclosing anything. So any other thoughts on communicating or meeting them where they're safe? So what are you going to communicate? And again, some of these things we touched on earlier in the day, and other speakers have touched on them as well. But you're going to want to give your older youth a much more clear picture of who you are and what your role is and how to reach you. You're going to need to give them some more detail and some more significance than you would give a 3 or 4 or a 10-year-old, because they've got a much greater capacity to understand that. And be prepared, because they're going to ask you a lot more interesting and challenging questions than the younger kids will. They're going to want to know who's involved. They're going to want to know how decisions are being made. A lot of times they want to know who's going to talk to them. Or do they have to talk to the judge? Or are they allowed to talk to the judge? Anybody else get that question? Hey, I want to talk to the judge. Or, oh no, do I have to talk to the judge? I get both of those. And that's a really important question to reassure them that I'm not going to allow somebody to just make them go talk to the judge, but I can communicate with the judge and tell the judge what they want. I can give the judge their messages about how they feel and what they think. And if they really, really feel strongly about it, then we can explore it without telling them, oh yeah, we'll go do that. There have been some cases, rare cases, where a child who was much older, 16, 17, wanted to talk to the judge, and it was very, very important to them to do that. And we were able to make those arrangements in a safe way, in conjunction with their therapist, so that they could just talk to the judge off the record about how they felt about something. And that was really something that was helpful to them, but you don't want them to be afraid that they're going to have to do that if that's not something they really strongly want. Now, these kids are going to have a much better sense of time than some of the younger ones. So you're going to want to start communicating with them as early on as possible. Now, you're going to want to do that with any child. Time is short. Time is short when you're dealing with these cases and kids' lives. But when you have a 16-year-old, they know if they've been in care for a month before you come and talk to them. They know this. And if you want to start helping them understand what's happening and building your credibility and building the relationship with them, then you need to start sooner rather than later. And you need to talk to them or communicate with them frequently. They're going to know what MDTs are, and so you need to communicate with them what's happening, what's going to happen at the next one, and what happened at that MDT when you're done. They know what hearings are because you've explained this, so you need to communicate what's going to happen at this next hearing. What's the judge going to decide? Not what the decision will be, but what type of decision is it? And let them know what happened afterward. So these types of things you're going to want to stay on top of, and the when should be on a very regular basis. Whenever anything happens that's going to impact them or their case. You're also going to want to make sure that they understand confidentiality and the limits of confidentiality. They can have a safe haven in you, but that safe haven has got limits. If they are disclosing something about that child being placed at some high risk of a probable harm, they need to understand that you don't have any other choice but to report back to the judge. But if they're going to tell you something else in confidence that doesn't have anything to do with them being at risk of potential harm, then that's going to be a confidence that you keep. or it will be one, discussing this with your client, that you can share with the judge but nobody else. You can file those things under seal. Those are reassurances to an older youth that they can trust what you say and they can trust the relationship so that they can be open with you about how they feel and what they want and what they need. It's important that they also understand their legal rights. They're old enough when they hit their teens to certainly understand what those rights are. And it's important to explain those just like you would to an adult. You may use different words, different language. You may need to explain it in smaller chunks rather than one big long meeting, but you certainly can explain those and they'll understand them if you use the right language, if you work with them on it. And of course, what kinds of proceedings are going to be had, and what is sort of the map, the roadmap of this entire case. This is something that they're going to want to see and understand. What is the end point in the courtroom? Help them to understand what that's going to look like. You're also going to want to talk with them about visitation issues and find out what they think, what they feel, what they want, with the understanding that they don't make that decision, the judge does, but the judge needs to hear what they have to say about those decisions and how they feel about visitation. Same with permanency. Permanency recommendations, the child really needs to know, and you need to communicate that with them. Anything that is pertinent to their case, that's age appropriate, and as you get older and older toward 18, most of it's going to become appropriate. They need to be aware of those things. Do use your discretion about the information that you provide. Even an older youth does not really need to know the details of some of the evidentiary hearings. They really don't. All that's going to do is further traumatize them. They do need to know what the outcomes are and what decisions the judge makes, but really does not need to know the details about what mom or dad may have done that they may not be aware of. That's not something to communicate with them just as a matter of course. You do want to use therapists and other service providers to help with these lines of communication. Help to figure out how best to share this information with your older youth and how to develop a safe environment where they can best hear and understand and think about and process what's happening and all of the decisions that they're making about what they're going to ask for and what they want. Do not use any of these types of communications as some sort of fact-finding fishing expedition. And I think Kristen covered that very well. You just cannot use this process to further traumatize an older child or a younger child by trying to do a forensic interview when you are not in that position to do one. And be sure to get to know your client, not just the basics, but sit down and just talk to them. What do they like to do? Do they have any hobbies? Do they play sports? You know, I can't even believe the number of kids who have all of these crazy wild hobbies that I just wouldn't have thought. There's one child that I've been representing for a while who's taken up crocheting and is talking all about this great crocheting, and I would have never pegged that, but she really likes it. And I thought that was pretty cool. I've got a lot of kids that play basketball and football and some of the more common things that you would see with a lot of the youth out there. I've got some that like to act. I've got some that like to dance. You know, there are a lot of different hobbies. Get to know them. Get to know what they like. It's going to tell you a lot about who they are as a person. You need to involve the older youth in decisions. Now, they don't need to make the decision, but you have to involve them in that decision-making process about making those recommendations. And placement is going to be one of the earliest decisions that you're going to be faced with making recommendations about. They may have very strong feelings about who they may want to be placed with. They may have ideas about either kinship or relative placements that would be excellent placements for them that never would have occurred to members of the MDT. I've got one set of teenagers who are siblings, and they are currently placed with one of their sports coaches. It would never have occurred to us to go and seek out that sports coach, but that coach had played a very significant role in their lives for several years. And when we were looking for a placement, they both thought that would be a good idea, and we, of course, checked things out and approached the coach. They are going to be in a permanent placement with this coach now. They've been there for months, and the case we finally finished disposition, and they are going to have this as a permanent placement. So talk to them and ask them what their thoughts and feelings are, and sometimes they can give you some surprising solutions that the team may not have thought of otherwise. You want to make sure, as you're discussing their preferences, to also give them some realistic expectations. Just because they want to go and live with their boyfriend's parents doesn't mean that's going to happen, okay? And I don't know about you, but I've had clients who are teens ask that. Or can I live with my best friend's mom? And that obviously is something you need to discuss with them in a realistic way so that their expectations are realistic. With visitation, again, you want to ask how they feel about things and what they think about visitation. Not just who they would like to visit, but under what kinds of circumstances. I've had teens tell me that they specifically want visits to be supervised until they have seen that mom can stay clean for a while. Anybody else had that experience? I want to see mom, but I want to make sure she can stay clean. Sometimes they will say that they want some specific limitations put on them. I've had teens tell me, yeah, I would like to see dad, but I don't want to see him until he has finished whatever phase of treatment he's on. Until then, I just want to talk to him. That's okay. And that shows a great deal of insight for some of these older kids. So talk to them about it, and you can talk to them about it in a way that is much more difficult or impossible with the younger kids. And also, discuss this with them, not just once, but discuss visitation with them on an ongoing basis. I've had older youth who were absolutely dead set against visiting with their parents when the case started. They did not want to see them, did not want to talk to them, wanted nothing to do with them. And by the end of, not necessarily the improvement period, but pretty close to that, they're in a position where not only do they want to see their parents, but we've started visits because they have moved and progressed that far in their work with their therapist, and their parents have progressed, and now they've changed their mind and they do want a relationship. And this can happen more than you think. So have that conversation on an ongoing basis, not just once or twice. You also want to discuss what MDTs are. And this is a concept that I think that we all sort of take for granted because we talk about it, we know what they are, most of us have participated in them. This is a completely foreign animal to teenagers. They're not going to have the experience or the understanding of why all of these people are going to be sitting in a room and why they need to discuss all these things unless you explain that to them. This is a team of people from all different backgrounds, and they're all coming together to help make sure that you are in a safe place and your needs are being met, and to help your family. And it's important that they understand what kinds of things are discussed in those meetings. I've had some older youth who want to go to MDT meetings, and others who don't want to go to MDT meetings. But the ones who say, I really want to go, if you have a youth that's absolutely, I want to go, you may want to consider bifurcating that meeting. That way they can attend the meeting, they can share their thoughts, their concerns, and the team can make some decisions about whether it's a good idea for the parents to be there for that portion of the meeting. And then after the youth has had a chance to meet everybody and engage and discuss what they need, then at that point they can step out and their parents can come in, and they don't have to say things that they may be uncomfortable saying in front of their parents that they want the team to know about. That can be really empowering for a child to be able to go to an MDT that's there for their benefit and talk to these people rather than just hearing about it. But you need to do it in a way that's going to be as therapeutically gentle on them as possible, even when they're an older youth. Now, you want to definitely consider their age and maturity level when making a decision like that. If you're going to bifurcate it, a younger youth, not such a big deal. But if you're going to have any MDT that's not bifurcated, where parents and child are both there, then please consider where you are in that process. If you're very close to reunification and you're just sort of in the home stretch, and this youth is either at home or ready to come home, then that may be a situation where everybody can be in the same place at the same time for part of it, but you need to be very careful about doing that. Again, you don't want to put the youth into a situation where they think they're going to be talking about something, about how they feel, about what they think, with their parents sitting right there and have them feel uncomfortable doing that. You might want to also prepare them ahead of time, not just in terms of what they will be discussing, but in how they can best communicate if they're going to participate in an MDT. You can help them by saying, what kinds of things do you want the MDT to know? And then you're prepared ahead of time. You can let them know how they can communicate that, and you can help them through the process if they get into this room of people and they're really not sure how to go from there. Same thing with hearings and youth attending hearings. There are some kids that I've had who said, I really want to go to a hearing, I really want to meet the judge, not just to tell the judge something privately, but because I want to see what happens. And you want to be careful about how and when you do that. I have absolutely taken older youth to hearings, but those have been hearings where either we are at the very end of the process, we're getting ready to reunify, or there's been some circumstance where I know that the parents are not going to be there, and the youth can just simply see what's going on or get a chance to meet the judge. This is different than, I want to talk to the judge. This is just, I want to see what happens here. Just be careful. They have a right to know what's going on. If they really want to go, then try to make some therapeutic way for that to happen, or choose a hearing where it's not going to be an adversarial proceeding, where they're not going to hear evidence that could be really harmful, but do try to accommodate. And obviously, again, keep their age and maturity level in consideration when you're making those decisions. Now, again, we're running a little bit low on time, so you want to have the same kinds of considerations with hearings that you do with the MDTs generally. And you want to also alert the court if there is a hearing that your youth is going to attend. I've got a few judges that are fine with surprises. I've got many who are not. And they would be less than thrilled if I just show up with a 16-year-old without telling them that they're coming. So even though they have every right to participate to the extent that they can, let your judges know. Oops, and I think they just went off permanency. So this is a really, really important part of representing an older youth. When you're looking at permanency, you know that the rules require that the guardian ad litem remain involved and continue in their representation until permanent placement of the child has been achieved. And when you're talking about older youth, that can be a long time. That can be long after disposition, unfortunately. So during that period, you need to remain in contact and as close a contact with your older youth than you did while the case was moving quickly and while you were having hearings on a regular basis that were substantive hearings. You need to remain at that level of contact, because just because disposition is over doesn't mean that their need for you and that bond with you and your representation has diminished at all. In fact, sometimes over a period of years, you will be the one constant in that child's life. In these long, long cases, when they go through 6 caseworkers and 7 placements and 2 therapists, the only one who is still part of their life is you. So you want to keep in mind that permanency, the rule that you're going to represent through permanency is not just to make sure that all of the procedural I's are dotted and T's are crossed. It's to make sure that the child you represent really has you to rely on until they are in a safe, permanent placement. Now, children who are age 14 or older have a substantial say in what their permanency plan is, and specifically in whether or not a court can terminate parental rights. And I have had several cases where I've had an older youth who has said, absolutely, under no circumstances do I want to go home and live with mom and dad, and absolutely under no circumstances do I want their parental rights terminated. Anybody else had that experience? Yeah, a lot of you. And that's not really surprising to me when I think about where they are emotionally, but it is critical that you communicate that to the court so that the court is aware of that. For these children, they still have that emotional bond with their parents, even though you can tell, they know that this is not a healthy relationship. They can't live in their parents' custody. They're not going to be able to rely on them to serve a parental role, but they have an emotional bond, and that emotional bond is important enough that they want to preserve it. You need to help them preserve it. So please, please discuss with your older youth, when you get to that point in those types of cases, what their preference is, because it really is that important to them. I'm just going to make a quick note about transition planning. I could actually stand and talk for an hour on transition planning alone, but looking back to the initial statistics I gave you at the beginning of this presentation, we've got a fair number of youth that are aging out of the system every year in West Virginia. And if you are a guardian ad litem for a child who is going to turn 18 while in foster care, you really need to be looking at transition planning. I would urge you, if you have not done transition planning for an older youth, I would urge you to look at some of the resources that I know are on the CIP website, because we've presented on that before. I would urge you to talk with caseworkers. I would urge you to contact W.Va. They'll talk to you on the phone about the Modify program. I would urge you to look into some of the wonderful programs that are coming up on the horizon that we have heard about today, but really, you need to start transition planning. Teens who do not have a strong transition plan are at a hugely higher risk for teen parenthood and for incarceration or being homeless or being unemployed. And a good transition plan is something that you can give them to really help them be successful. It needs to be considered part of a concurrent plan. You know, you're required to do concurrent planning. It needs to be part of a concurrent plan so that if their permanency plan falls through and they're 16 years old and you don't know whether or not you're going to find another good placement for them before they turn 18, you're not starting from ground zero on the eve of them turning 17. Or, goodness forbid, on the eve of them turning 18. You want to make sure it's a concurrent plan. And discuss the transition planning with them. The goal of this is to make sure that the resources and that the services that are necessary are in place for them and that they are aware of them. They are an integral part of that plan. Please take a look at those resources and give some thought to transition planning for your older youth. And again, I want to thank all of you for all that you do. You are amazing individuals to put your heart and your work into this type of a profession and work with these kids. So I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.